Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Dylbozer's Den. And today we're going to be discussing the most recent release from Little Rock, Arkansas's own Pallbearer, Mine Burns Alive, out through Nuclear Blast Records. So I became familiar with Pallbearer in 2012 when they were touring for their Sorrow and Extinction album. They swung through Nashville at the Exit Inn. I just remember it being one of the first doom bands I ever really got to see live. Also knowing and finding out that they were from Little Rock, Arkansas really hit home with me as I grew up in, that vicinity. This band formed in 2008 and they formed right before I moved out. So I really didn't get to see this band in its early era. So seeing them during that point kind of felt like being back home in a weird way. I followed the band throughout their career. I got to see them a couple more times. I saw them once in Louisville with Inner Arma and Gatecreeper. I saw them again with Baroness in Nashville. And during that time frame, I got to hear the subtle changes that were happening to the band, not necessarily getting to see the band in between Sorrow and Extinction and Heartless in 2017. So I lost that Foundations of Burden kind of tour cycle. But I noticed that they were progressing forward. They had pushed and progressed a little bit more than just being a standard doom band. They'd moved forward. They'd become more melodic, maybe gotten in touch with some of their, folk roots, got in touch with some of their prog roots, maybe even some of their post-rock roots even. And then we get Forgotten Days in 2020, which was kind of a blending of their doomier days, but also just focusing in on the riff. It was also released during the pandemic, when a lot of bands weren't able to tour and they weren't really able to capitalize on that record very much. And it seems, based off the information I have on this newest release, that a lot has changed. Musically, it has definitely changed. And I was really excited for it. Once I heard the singles, once I heard what the album was possibly going to sound like, I was really excited. It sounded more like the melodic passages from Sorrow and Extinction, Foundations of Burden, Heartless, that I enjoyed so much, but it still used the riffs sparingly, but it added to the impact of those riffs and how they were played and how they came across. Let's dig into a little bit of the backstory on this record. There were a couple of writing sessions that were set up at the end of 2020, early 2021, maybe even as far out as 2022. Some of these songs were even written concurrently with the Forgotten Days material, but those writing sessions never really became fruitful. And a couple other changes were going on during this period of time. Bassist Joseph Rowland moved from New York, where he had lived for close to a decade, back into Arkansas. He had recently looked into wanting to open up his own recording studio and realized it was going to be a little too expensive to do that in the state of New York. So he moved back to Little Rock, Arkansas and opened up Idlewild Audio. Thus, doing this, it put all of the band members back in the same area for the first time in about 10 years. Some of the guys even living a mile, 3 minutes away, however you want to describe it, living close enough that they're in walking distance of it. And something about being back where they started really added to the vibe. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It takes you through many emotions going through this record. Let's kind of round out the band here a little bit with the lineup. So you've got bassist and vocalist Joseph Rowland, guitarist and vocalist Brett Campbell, you have guitarist Devin Holt, and you have drummer Mark Learley. You've also got some returning faces that the band has worked with in the past. They recorded with Jason Weinheimer, who had worked with the band previously on the Heartless album, as well as Zach Reeves. This was recorded at Fellowship Hall Sound in Little Rock, Arkansas. The band also did some additional recording at Joseph's own studio, Idlewild Audio. I believe that's where the saxophone was recorded that we'll discuss later on the record. Actually, funny point about the record, I've got it sitting here to my left, doesn't have an album insert, which is kind of funny. So lyrically, kind of hard to dig into in that aspect. Maybe there's a flaw at the record plant. Hopefully we can find something out. I'd love to have an insert if it was indeed supposed to be part of the pressing and maybe it just got left out. But if not, hey, it happens. I'll figure it out. But it was mixed by Mario Quintero, who is based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at his Audio MQ headquarters, who recently just did the Blair self-titled album. Shout out to Alex Wallwork. We got some familiar faces. The band's back at home. Surely the album is going to be just chock full of riffs. It's going to be the heaviest thing it's ever done. It's going to be aggressive. It's going to sound like the first record all over again. Wrong. Completely wrong, if that's what you're looking for. It sounds like Pallbearer, but it sounds like all of their more melodic influences. sounds like bands that I'm unfamiliar with, bands such as Low, Talk Talk. Some of the progressive leanings are in there, like King Crimson, Rush, yes. The vocal arrangements, the vocal harmonies, some of the guitar harmonies, definitely for sure, all of those and above. I have not had a chance to check out Talk Talk or Low, but I have to see what it sounds like based off of this album. And isn't that what music's all about? Is listening to something that you really love and going, oh, it sounds like all of these components. I have to go listen to this. We talked about that in depth with Thou. They've described themselves as a grunge band, essentially, and it just sounds like that through a Thou filter. So the artwork for the record is a little bit different. All of the albums prior had been like paintings and so on and so forth. This is the first time the band had licensed a piece of art for the album, and it is done by an artist named Billy Armstrong, not to be confused with Green Day's Billy Joe Armstrong. Two different people. The internet let me know all about that it's two different people. Anyway, this piece is from a series called Falling Through History. I couldn't really pinpoint which piece this was, but what I did found is the Fall of Faith on. Hope this is the correct piece. If not, please, someone reach out, let me know. But there were 3 videos as well for this album with the 3 singles. Tracks Where the Light Fades, Endless Place, Mind Burns Alive, all directed by Dan Almasi. Great videos. You can definitely see the influence from many, many, many things in those videos. And they're great representations of the tracks that we heard for the album. And when you've got 3 tracks released for a 6-track album, I mean, that's half the record, right? So you loosely got to hear the album before it was released. If you didn't know what you were getting, you definitely knew by then. With all that being said, let's dig in the record. This is a really, really heavy record, and not just sonically, but lyrically. And it deals with a lot of mental issues and mental health. It deals with trauma, it deals with isolation, which we were all familiar with for a handful of years during the kind of COVID era. Some people do really well with isolation. A lot of people don't. And sometimes it can drive you crazy and drive you to have thoughts that you don't want to have. And we don't want anything to happen to anybody that we care for, but sometimes that can yield really interesting creative results, especially if you've got a creative mind like myself or anybody else, and especially the guys in Pallbearer. Let's just kick things off with this first track, Where the Light Fades. The track opens up very melodically, very clean. So the first single almost opens up like an alt-rock version of a funeral procession. What I've noticed in a lot of the research for this album is that there's a ton of references to alternative rock or alt-rock on this. And I can see that, I can see the influence. I can see the age of the guys, growing up in the 90s and being directly influenced by that. But it doesn't sound like an alt-rock record to me. It just sounds like a more melodic, depressing doom record, which I want. And I've always been able to take bands for what they are when they say that, hey, it still sounds like us. We've just kind of filtered this influence into our music. And that's what this still sounds like. It's cleaner. The mastering and mixing job on this is great. You can hear every single instrument on here. Bassist Joseph Rowland gets to play bass. He gets to play bass. It's not just supporting the riff, which is fine too. That's a different form of bass playing, but he's got melodic flourishes in here, and he's got, different little catchy lines that are going under the vocals and interplay. Like, he actually gets to play bass. And I always love that when it comes to a heavy record. We're not just playing the same 4 notes that a guitar would play. And around the 3-minute and 15-second mark, and this is when you really start to feel the track build up and you get that kind of like release, and it slams like Pallbearer would. It makes the impact that much greater when you spread it out and you get it sparse. I can hear a voice calling me from somewhere deep down. The riffs are fewer on this album, but they hit a lot harder because of that. It's kind of like, I'll use kind of my listening habits as an example. I listen to death metal a lot. I listen to it so much. It all just kind of sounds normal to me after a while. But then I'll listen to something like this where like the big riffs come in at certain points in time, and it just sounds heavier than any, blast beat ridden thing I've heard in a long time. Sound like a late 80s Rush track to me. The melodic aspect, the way the vocals, the hooks, the harmonies, the way the vocals even sound. The band still knows how to heavy it up. The band still knows how to write a great track. They know how to write hooks. They know how to make the music reflect the lyrics on this. And that's what you're going to notice on the rest of this album. But we segue straight into Mind Burns Alive, the title track. And this track kicks off with a great Pallbearer style riff. A riff like this really shows their Southern roots without it just being derivative. It doesn't sound like, it's not like they're playing a cover of Give Me Three Steps or anything to this, but you can definitely hear it in the way the structures are, the way the notes are played, the way the progressions are, the way the scale tones are played in this part. You can definitely tell where their Southern roots are. I can't stop talking about the mixing and mastering of this album. It sounds so clear and clean. It almost sounds like it cost a lot more money to mix and master this than it probably did. And that's not a slight, but it just shows how well the guys that mixed and mastered this are at their job. And I give them kudos to this. This is a great representation of how this band sounds. And I hope they can reflect this sound live. And if not, that's great too. But I'm really looking forward to seeing this live. Matter of fact, as this episode drops, this same day, I will be seeing Pallbearer on their current tour in Murfreesboro, Tennessee at a venue called Hop Springs. But let's get back to this track here. It's got their Southern roots. It's got guitar harmonies in there. Let's not forget that this is a 2-guitar band, so there better be fucking harmonies on this thing. If you got 2 guitars, you might as well do it. It's not that hard. Just play 3 notes up from the first note. It's that easy. These guys put a little bit more thought into it than just that. Just play my part, but play it kind of different, It's a little bit more to it than that. You've got vocal breaks in this song that are almost at a whisper that add almost a kind of post-rock, almost early emo kind of influence to it. I'm sure I am using my caveman brain to come up with things that could draw, a reference point for me here. But I mean, it's just that it sounds like a really, really well done post-rock kind of part with those clean vocals on top of it like that. It's almost like this portion of this song could have been a song in its own right on these old compilations I used to see advertised on TV as a kid called the Pure Moods compilation.
Experience Pure Moods, the perfect soundtrack for your way of life. Direct from Europe, this multi-platinum collection has won the hearts of millions. Set adrift with the timeless pleasures of tubular bells. Or take a trip into the unknown with the X-Files theme.
Hell, I would have loved it. Pallbearer would have fit right in if this came out in the early 90s. The bridge in this song really makes me think of Type O, and I go back to when the band covered Love You to Death, and I can definitely hear it with some of the chorus sounds and some of the way the lead guitar lines are done on this. This is also a point where you get to hear that old trope for the band, which is they sound like Jethro Tull in 33 RPMs, but this is when the vocals, Brett sounds a lot like Jethro Tull to me. And it fits so much. He doesn't sound just like them at all, but he's got that kind of thing to his voice that sounds very much like that. I love the way his vocals sound. They may have gotten more Jethro Tull comparisons when they started out as opposed to where they are now. Now they just sound like Pallbearer. They're 5 albums in. This band sounds like this band with their influence being filtered through. Then we get into track 3, Signals. Kind of sounds like Slint at the beginning of it. Clean, sparse, almost feels like the playing is dialed back. Maybe they're playing with dynamics a little bit more. They're playing softer, and it just has a very pure kind of intent to it to really drive the point home. The mixing on this track is tremendous. I feel like the songs are so perfectly written for this album and the vibe and the tone that they're wanting to get across on this, that it separates itself from any of the other records in their catalog. This album as a whole feels like a new step in a new direction for them. I feel like it's probably the most mature thing they've ever done. I mean, of course it is. It's their 5th record. They're still maturing as songwriters. They're learning more as songwriters, but whatever it took that amount of time in between Forgotten Days and this to bring something as mature and well-written and finalized as this band has put out with this record. Again, I seem to get more and more shocked by records that come out this year that are just bending my head off my neck. Signals is absolutely a great representation of that. The song feels so familiar, like I've heard it before, like I've heard it from another band, but I've never heard it before. It also sounds a little bit different than the rest of the tracks on the album, but it fits right in. It's got these great melodic solos at the end, and there's also at the very tail end of it, there is some radio transmission that is cutting through on this. And from what I've gathered, Devin Holt was tracking for the album, and he finished recording some solos, and that just happened to pop up when he was tracking the song, and they kept it in because it fit along with the subject matter of the song. Endless Place, it's the 4th track on the album. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. This is, to me, the band's magnum opus currently. It's not the longest track on the album. It's one of the 2 10-plus minute tracks, but it seems like the centerpiece of the record to me. It seems like it is the longest track on the album because it's so epic and grandiose. It doesn't drag on. That's with a lot of these songs being longer, they don't feel like they're dragging on. They don't feel like I'm losing interest. They don't feel like, I'm bored. It doesn't feel like I'm falling asleep. These are great, perfectly executed and written tracks. I believe Brett Campbell and Joseph Rowland co-wrote the lyrics on this completely separate. They had no idea that, they were both going to come up with the same concept that would blend together for this track. It starts out with an acoustic passage. There's a few tracks on here that start out very quiet, very clean, very crisp, but then it kicks right into distorted, heavy music. Drummer Mark literally just shows it off. There are these snappy fills all over the first portion of this track. They're just filling space, and they're just helping drive the point of the song home. It helps the track move so furiously without it being a faster track. This band's not going to play terribly fast. We know that. We know that from their track record. But that doesn't mean that they can't move forward and show intensity with playing at these slower paces or these mid-tempo paces for them. I remarked about the bass tone and the bass playing in the first track of the record, but the distorted, overdriven bass is really cutting through on this track a lot, and it sounds really, really, really fucking good. This is the track that's got the saxophone in it. It seemed to be a friend of theirs in Arkansas that they just called one day and said, "Hey, can you come in and record on the record?" And it was just very off the cuff like that. There's a couple other bands that have used saxophone and more of a death metal approach, and it works. For some reason, I feel like it fits this a little bit better because the music is more fitting of it. It doesn't feel like an abstract instrument. It feels like an instrument that fits, and it almost plays another vocal melody with this very sharp sounding woodwind that's playing. This track brings every aspect of what this band is about. You could give this to somebody that's not a fan of the band and go, you're going to find everything you want to know about this band from this track. Kudos to these guys for writing a track like this and making it so interesting and fun. A lot of the subject matter on this record is really, really heavy. So being able to take positive things from a record like this it just shows that the band are professionals and they know exactly what they're doing, and they hope that this record can reach people in many different ways. So we go to the 5th track, Daybreak. It starts out in a very singer-songwriter style. It initially made me think of the band Everclear for some reason. Just the way it was produced. Obviously, the vocals sound nothing like that band. It's not even the same style. That's vastly different kind of pop rock band than this is, but right out the gate sounded like Everclear to me. This track also feels like a bit of a palate cleanser from Endless Place. Some bands use soundscapes. This band just uses a track to do this, and it's a very well-written track. The full band kicks in at around 2 minutes, and it's very subtle, like it's still carrying the weight of the track. This track just kind of feeds off of that, and then it kicks into this huge, fuzzed out, just almost makes you want to do the doo-doo face.
It's plainly tearing at the seams. So let the record show. Should I ever lose control without your footing?
It's what I described earlier when I was discussing how the album has fewer riffs, but when they use them, the impact is just so much more important and so much more grand and great that when a moment like this comes up, it hits you out of left field and you're going, oh, they still know how to do this shit. It's that fucking good. I do want to bring up as well that the lush guitar sounds on this album are exquisite. I mentioned Typo Negative before, kind of that October Rust style, and it's just very lush, very layered. They definitely aren't afraid to, make things sound really pretty. The more I listen to this record, the more I fall in love with it. Maybe this one just caught me. Maybe I was in a mood. Maybe I was in the right mood for this. Definitely hits emotionally. I haven't felt this connected emotionally to a record in a long time. So with the mental health issues that I've dealt with in the past and have learned to talk about and learn to discuss, hearing stuff like this is as much as I love it, I hate it as well, because it cuts so close to home with a lot of it. But again, such a great record. And we still got one more fucking track. We're going to end the record out with Disease. And this track starts out relatively clean, slightly overdriven, and then it kicks right into Pallbearer Doom mode. Great vocals and warm guitar sounds all over it. There's a lead guitar that kicks in at about 2 minutes. That's kind of filling in the gaps of this. It's kind of a modified verse of sorts. It's like they took what they wanted to put over the verse and they just put it over a completely different part of the song, thus adding this kind of weird structure to it. And it just works so well with these harmony guitars. Brett and Joseph's vocals mesh almost as well as like Lane and Jerry's from Alice in Chains. Very like down in a hole kind of like vocal layering on this that I love so much. When you can get a couple guys that sound and know each other's voices so well that they can just nail it, and it seems like it's the same vocalist tracking both parts, but you can still hear the tonal differences. It has this very huge sounding, sparse and spacey bridge that has these guttural whispered vocals kind of layered throughout this bridge that are very Goblin-esque in sound. I don't know if they're big horror fans or not, but it's the first thing it made me think of. That spacey bridge leads right into, in my opinion, the best riff on the whole fucking record. Massive sounding riff. I hear layered keyboards in there, but just slightly so. It fades out the song. It ends the song. The impact of that riff owes so much credit to how the band wrote the song and owes so much to the band being able to know that's a really great riff. We have to use it to end out the record. The vocal line that stands out to me the most on the whole record is this final one that I picked up, which is lives filled with empty pursuits. That's a hard one to take because I think we've all got things that we dove headfirst into or dove into, and maybe they didn't work out the way we wanted them to. And then we don't realize that till much later. And sometimes it takes hearing an album to make you think about this. This is a hell of a fucking record. I don't know what shape I'm going to be in when I see the band tonight, but I'm really hoping that my girlfriend who's going with me will understand. I'm sure I will have a great time. The band has a shitload of touring set up for this year. It started last night, June 6th, and it goes until August 23rd, kind of the tail end of the summer. But it's got a few bands that they're bringing out with them on this one. The first portion of the tour, you've got Arkansas's own Wake. Arkansas Legends doesn't tour a whole lot, hasn't put out a record in a very long time, out touring with their buddies from Arkansas. So this will be a double whammy. This will be a great band to see. Certain dates, they'll also have kind of stoner doom band Resin with them, REZN, from June 11th till the 29th. They'll also have, and I'm so bummed that I'm missing this band, but hopefully I'll get to see them soon. They'll have Inner Arma with them from July 11th through August 3rd. Another record that caught me out of nowhere, New Heaven. I think Mind Burns Alive and New Heaven are very comparable in what they've affected. It's completely different sounding albums, completely different sounding bands, but they hit heavy on a guttural level. And then they've got The Keening, formerly of the band Sub Rosa, out on the entire tour. They put out a great Relapse album this past year. Massive tour for this band. I hope this album does very well for them. I'm excited for it. You should be fucking excited for it. You should be more than excited for it. The band has put a lot of work into this album and it completely reflects so. We'll be back with more episodes of the Riff Worship podcast. Check us out on Facebook, X, Instagram. And again, every Friday, I'll be dropping another one of these things where you get to hear me ramble for 4 minutes. If not, you don't have to fucking listen. But anyway, thanks again, guys.